So, hello everybody. Good evening. You are at the Indian Express E-xplained session. This is the fourth of a series of explanatory conversations that we are having with experts here on what else? Various aspects of the lockdown and the for today, the economic aspects related to that. A little brand pitch before we start off. Explained is that section of the Indian Express journalism project, which explores the explanatory aspects of our journalism to help you understand the news better. So it's not entirely opinion. It is analysis. It is background. It is the big picture. It is connecting the dots. I mean, that's what Explain is really all about. And the readers have given us a really good response on this, which has encouraged us to have more and more of these sessions. So today we have. Okay, I just finished that. After I finish talking, what will happen is my colleague Vaidyanathan Iyer, who is with me on your screens now, he will make a short presentation on the subject that we are going to talk about. Just so to introduce you, basically laid out the ground of the conversation that will follow, and after which the conversation will begin. The conversation today, our expert is Dr. Naushad Forbes, of course, co-chairman of Forbes Marshall and the former chairman of CII. All of you are familiar with him. Dr. Forbes is an industrialist and an intellectual, one of the most thoughtful, erudite voices of Indian history, of Indian industry. He's an engineer by training, and he's also had a very long association with Stanford University. And he's really the best person that you can have here as a representative of industry, as well as an observer of the Indian economy, to explain to us at this really critical juncture that we are in now. Talking to him will be, as I said, my colleague Vaidi, National Affairs Editor at the Indian Express, and also a veteran watcher and reporter and writer on the Indian economy. And after Vaidi and Naushad have had about 35-40 minutes of conversation, we shall open to all of you, any of you who want to ask some questions. What you'll have to do is some of you have already pitched some questions to us, and during the course of the conversation, you have about 35-40 minutes to pitch more questions, and we will take a certain selection of those questions and we shall put it to Dr. Forbes here. So ready to go, Vaidi, all yours.
Thank you. A warm welcome to you, Naushad. And just to set the context for the conversation, I thought I may just look at what has been happening in the Indian economy over the last 2 years. So essentially, the conversation was likely to be around how does the corporate sector pick its pieces as lockdown guidelines are eased more and more in the coming days. But to set the tone for the conversation, in the last 2 years have been, the Indian economy, as we all know, has been slowing down continuously. I think, from about 8.2% in April, May, June quarter of 2018, the Indian economy slowed down very sharply. And in July to September 2019, the economy was growing at just 4.2%, 4.5%. That is almost, it had slowed down by almost half of the pace. During this slowdown too, while the government did put up numbers showing highest FDIs, made a push for Make in India, the capacity addition in the corporate sector has only been declining, and this you could make out also from the credit growth for the industry, which the Reserve Bank of India gives you data on. The credit growth for the industry in 2019-20 was less than 1%. The slowdown has hit across sectors, and if you look at just a 3-year span, because I said this, the economy has been slowing continuously. So between 2016, the year of demonetization, the credit growth of the industry has expanded by a compounded annual growth rate of just under 2%. So we can see that in either there was no demand for credit, or the banks were reluctant to push credit. There could be other reasons which Naushad can illuminate us with. Particularly the manufacturing sector, I think uh, it suffered the most. The gross value addition in the manufacturing sector just increased by 0.9% in 2019-20. It was probably the lowest since the 2011-12 GDP series was put in place by the government of India. In fact, it was the second lowest after almost 5 years. Production and demand both has been declining, which has been a major cause of worry. A decline in demand, particularly I think for the industry, was a big worry. If you look at just the capacity utilization, you get a sense of how demand has slowed down. The capacity utilization, which was nearing 75 odd percent, 4 years back, got down to less than 70%, was 68.6%, probably its lowest in the last 5 years. The IIP, the Index for Industrial Production, that is industrial output, has been dipping. Manufacturing, which accounts for almost 3/4 of the industrial output, it also contracted in March because the lockdown started in March itself. And for the full year also, it contracted by about 1.3% in 2019-20. So there are many concerns for India Inc. today. I think as the lockdown we are seeing the lockdown phase 4 now, which ends end of this month. So we would have seen in the first 2 months of the current financial year 2020-21 that there has been absolutely no or very little economic activity in India. And demand and investment, both investment has been a concern for the last 6 years, if at least 6 years. Credit rating agencies tell us that profitability of companies may sharply erode by about 25 to 30%, while the top line, that is the revenues, will also drop by about 15-20%. So these are I would say are still conservative estimates, because we are living in very uncertain times and we don't know what really holds forth in the coming months. Probably the worst hit is the services sector, because services which you do not consume is lost services. I don't think you regain any output from 2 months of lost services, probably unlike in manufacturing, where manufacturing, at least I can buy a toothbrush, but something which I missed, going to a salon in 2 months, I will go in the normal case, but I would have missed it anyway. So I think services is worst hit. Over the last 1 week, since May 12th, when the Prime Minister first announced the Atmanirbhar package, we have seen that the Finance Minister took it off from there, and over the next 5 days, she announced 5 tranches of relief package, COVID-19 relief package, economic relief package, which many people have said that is very inadequate. It is largely liquidity driven, with very little fiscal cost to the central government. The Indian Express calculated it at 1.1% of the GDP, which is just about 2 lakh crores of rupees. So will it be enough for? But there was a big package for micro, small, and medium enterprises, which felt the pain most acutely. So to answer many of the questions which I have, and which most of you would have, who have joined us on this online explained, Naushad, let me ask you, start off with first, like now that the lockdown guidelines have eased a bit, what is your shop floor looking like?
There are a few people then who are out of state who need to come in. That's a much more difficult thing to do. There are some people who are just very afraid about coming back to work and need reassurance before they do. And there are some people in containment areas in other cities who can't move for now and shouldn't be able to move for now. So at present, we're running, even though we've got 40% of all people on the shop floor, we're probably running at around 20% of output, because it's a struggle to get, if you don't have everything open, you're struggling to get the whole supply chain to function. And you keep it's easy when everything's at 100, but when some things are at maybe 60 and some things are at 0, then that 0 stops some of the 60 from happening as well. So because you're just short of components or short of packing material, or short of the particular skill set that's in a particular shop floor member to be able to do a particular job. So it's still a very low operating level. And then we have two other plants that we have which come within the PCMC. They started last week. They're also gradually getting back into operations. And the one plant that we have in the UK never stopped. Even though the UK has been much harder hit, it kept going. People in the office functions work from home, but the plant, the manufacturing continued right through March, right through April, and continues even now.
That's quite remarkable. Yeah. To just quick get your sense, Naushad, on the economic package itself. A lot of work was done since the first package was announced on March 26th. It was roughly about 1.7 lakh crore, as the government said. And now there was this 20 lakh crore Atmanirbhar package, which was laid out over 5 days. Does it feel like? Does it look like? Do you get a sense that it is a 20 lakh crore package?
Well, what the actual package comes to, statistic. The famous. Many people have their own favorite quote about statistics and what statistics can show and what they don't show. I am less concerned about the total value of the package and more about what the different objectives of the different components are. When at the beginning of April, we in the Confederation of Indian Industry and CII, we put together our own recommendations on what was needed. And we said our priority is roughly threefold. We said, first, we need something at the bottom of the pyramid. So something to address people who are in the informal sector, who are informally employed, who've suddenly found themselves without livelihoods. They need reassurance that they will be taken care of. The best way they get that reassurance is through a direct benefit transfer that would transfer money into their Jan Dhan accounts on a periodic basis. That has happened in bits and pieces, I believe, as a part of this particular sequence of packages that have been announced all of last week. I wish there was a clearer and simpler and more straightforward single transfer, a cash transfer that would go to people instead of free food for migrant workers here, a certain package for farmers there. Instead of that, do something that is wider ranging. It might add up to actually a significant number, but nothing like 20 lakh crore. And provide it to ensure maximum coverage, and don't worry too much if you end up duplicating some benefits for some people, because the important thing is not to leave anyone out. So that was the first thing we recommended. And I think this package that has been announced so far still falls short in addressing that fundamental need for direct benefit transfers to the most vulnerable in society. The second thing we'd recommended was a widespread enterprise support package for wages. And we said, look, 3 months' wages for all enterprises, provided not as a subsidy or a subvention or anything like that, but provided through the banking system at an interest rate of 4 to 5% with a government guarantee. And we said, what's the argument in favor of the 4 to 5% interest rate? Well, banks are completely risk averse. They're sitting flush with funds. They don't want to lend the money out because they're afraid of what might happen to it and may not come back. So they have it sitting 8.5 trillion rupees of bank funds sitting with the RBI, earning an interest rate of a little over 3%. So we said with a government guarantee, so there's no risk premium needed then, let them lend it out to enterprises at an interest rate of 4 to 5%. And we said, and then on the enterprise side, expect them to provide full support for all their employment for a full 3-month period. And this is what we recommend at the beginning of April. And this would apply to MSMEs, but it would apply to all enterprises. So whether it's a small shop, whether it's a large construction firm, whether it's a small MSME manufacturer, whether it's a large manufacturer, whether it's an airline, we provide this to all enterprises. What's been done in this package last week is addressing this in a somewhat modified way for MSMEs alone. Without question, MSMEs needed the help, needed the support, but I think the wider enterprise sector also needed it. And I think it needed it in the way in which we'd recommended, where no subsidy, but provide the government's role is one of guaranteeing these loans, because the cost of the guarantee is going to be a small percentage of the actual loans that go out. It depends, in fact, the proportion of guarantees that come to be claimed will depend on how effective our recovery is. If the recovery is quick and robust, then very little in the way of those guarantees will actually come to be claimed. So the cost will actually be even lower. So that's what we'd recommended for enterprises, and I think we've done a very small part of that so far. And then the third piece that we recommended was, we said for particular stress sectors, we need to, hospitality and the tourism sector, the travel sector, airlines, for example, people who run taxi operators, for example. We need to address their needs in a full-fledged way through one-time restructuring loans and a kind of loss pool arrangement that the government would set up and again administer through the banking system. Maybe there would be a possibility to take some equity stakes as well in those companies if required for a period of time, but to provide support for these particularly stressed sectors. For those stressed sectors, there's been nothing so far. So I would say overall, now that's if you like, the bad news, which is that out of what's needed, I think we did a very small amount, just the MSME support last week. But there are other things that were done last week that are very welcome, like on the agricultural reforms, addressing some old, some things that we were so reluctant to move on for years and years and years.
Yeah.
Those are potentially very fundamental reforms, but it's not going to help this month, next month, the next quarter, even maybe even the next year. It's going to help in the medium term going forward. There'll be very good positive developments as a result of that, but it doesn't help us get out of the immediate crisis that we have on our hands.
Yeah. Naushad, one thing which is kind of becomes a big economic challenge for the government or the corporate sector as well is, young, well-bodied, able men returning to their home states. We don't know the exact numbers, but I believe the number of people who are there in government shelters alone, which are provided by government, I'm told that there are about 28 lakhs. But there could be many more because, NGOs and, many people have come forward to put up these shelters.
Didn't the finance minister mention a number of 80 million?
80 million is, she said that number, but the number of people whose details that the central government has in terms of where Aadhaar numbers,
Sure.
Jan Dhan account numbers, those are available, I believe, are about 28 lakhs. Amongst these, probably 8 crore. Now, but the numbers are definitely much more, as we all know. I think, Bihar Chief Minister yesterday said that, 20 lakh are coming to Bihar over the next, so many days or whatever in the near coming days. So I'm sure, Bihar, Jharkhand, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, the numbers would be, could be much more, could be even a crore. So what are the challenges in bringing them back? Uh, does the formal manufacturing sector and the formal services sector employs these are these employees of the formal manufacturing and services sector? uh, what are the difficulties that you see in bringing them back now, and what kind of challenge do you foresee?
So, let me first answer that question from the perspective of our own firm,
Yeah.
and then where I have a more granular understanding, and then maybe some thoughts on the broader question.
Yeah.
So for our own firm, as I said, we've got now about 40%, as I mentioned earlier, of our shop floor members back on the shop floor.
Yeah.
Another around 40% are in various parts of the state of Maharashtra.
Yeah.
And they all went home, before the lockdown, actually. So they went home before the lockdown, back to their hometowns. We've been in touch with them all through, and the great bulk of them are very keen to come back as soon as they can, and they're struggling to get back, and that's why we're sending buses to pick them up. So we have no issue getting them back, actually. It's, in terms of attracting them back, they want to come back, they want to start work as soon as they can. They're experiencing the same frustrations that many of us are, trying to work from home and so on, and they're not able to work from home if you're in production.
Yeah.
For people who work for our vendors, who are smaller firms, they have more people who you'd call migrant labor, and they have people who've gone further to other states, etc. And they're also keen to come back. Because one of the things that we did with our own service providers first, let's say people who conservancy, for the garden, or the canteen contractor, the logistics providers, etc. As we said, look, we will keep paying you, but we'll say, what is your wage bill every month? And even if you're not providing the service in the month of April when we were closed, said we'll pay you to cover the cost of the wages, and then what we want to ensure that the wages are being paid. And we made sure that the wages were being paid, because we're a relatively medium-sized company, so we can talk to people and we know who was there and who was supposed to get paid. And they've been paid. So no issues in terms of actually getting all of them back as soon as they're able to come. As soon as there's transport, as soon as there's freedom for them to move, no issues. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because I think there are many companies that did what we did. I wouldn't say the majority, unfortunately, but I think we were certainly not alone. There were other companies that also took that care. Bajaj Auto certainly did that too. Took that care to ensure the same kind of care was taken for service providers, for people on contract, all of that. And there is no issue in getting people back, because people were assured that they were going to be looked after, their wages were still coming, they were getting the money in their accounts, etc. No issues, right? Much bigger problem when you start talking about informal services on the road, on, say, someone who runs a small tea shop on the side of the road, who's supposed to take care of that individual at the end of the day? The tea shop's been closed now for 70 days or 65 days. Person has zero income. There's no support mechanism. So what's that individual supposed to do, and how would they be taken care of? We've encouraged, for example, our own members. We've said that people who have cars, for example, most people will have someone living in a society. You'll have someone who comes and washes your car. We said, worry about the person who comes and washes your car, because, you'll be one of 20 people whose car he washes. But if everyone keeps paying that individual, the person will still be around. The person will be taken care of. And the day that you need the individual again, the person will be there because he's been looked after. It's possible to do. I think as a society, we could probably have done a better job, and as a government, we could have done a lot better
Yeah.
in terms of looking after those needs.
Just to get a sense, Naushad, how big is your staff strength? Like when you say 40%, that would be number?
So we're about at this particular plant, we're about 1,000 people.
Okay, that's
so
a fairly large, yeah.
Yeah. So we're about 1,000 people in this particular plant.
Yeah.
In the other two plants, they're smaller. They're about 150 between those two. Yeah.
So does the easing guidelines allow your company to open up fully, in the sense, can 100% staff come and work?
So for the Chakan plant, in terms of manufacturing operations, yes, it does permit now 100% of operations.
Okay.
For the plants within the PCMC area, they're still saying 33%.
Yeah.
But there's ambiguity there, which we're getting addressed sort of as we speak.
Yeah.
Until Sunday, it was 33%. There's ambiguity now whether it's still 33% or now for manufacturing, it's permitted in the PCMC.
So your sense is that, workers are not coming back if only 40% of the workers are right now there. Is it or not all 1,000 are coming back? That could be because of many reasons. That could be because of people not willing to come.
No. About 300 work in support functions, and we've said work from home.
Okay.
It's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
It provides for greater social distancing, so we've said work from home.
Absolutely.
But of the remaining 300 or so, they're about 250 are in various parts of the state that we need to get back, and another 50 or so are outside of the state.
Yeah, certainly. So, Naushad, the other thing is about, safety net for workers and MSMEs. Like, MSMEs has been the focus of this big government package of the 3 lakh collateral loan plus certain equity infusions, helping them, list stuff like that. In a recent, interview, Nitin Gadkari, who's the MSME minister, said that the total outstanding of the MSMEs with everybody, with government, with central government PSUs, with state PSUs and the private sector, is to the tune of almost 5 lakh crores. And when we speak to the government, like central government itself, is about, the sense we got was that in a year, the total outstanding is never more than 60 to 70,000. So a large part of it is also the private sector. The private sector also doesn't pay the MSMEs in a timely fashion. The credit cycle of MSME continues to be those, could be different for, different companies. Like, bigger companies, they have such huge power over the smaller enterprises, because he might be a solo supplier. There might be, some other rival. So they can just say that, okay, if you can't wait, then I'll go to somebody else. So why has the corporate sector not paid its the MSME's dues for a long time? Because the collective number of the corporate sector also sounds like huge.
I think it is a large number. I think it's a situation that has probably been improving over the last few years, but we've still got a long way to go. And I think at the end of the day, it depends on what kind of relationship you want with your vendors. Do you want to? You can't speak the language of partnership and we're all in this together and then not pay.
Absolutely.
It's not consistent, and I think if you want good quality output and you want it on time, one should pay on time. And whether there's any compulsion to pay or not is I think that's not the issue. The issue is that it's good business to meet commitments and pay on time. Yeah. Now, some companies in this particular period where they saw all their business evaporate, they just saw a hard stop in the month of April. If they simply were unable to pay on time, that's a different matter.
That's a
But
different
at least
matter.
you can still be talking with people saying, listen, as soon as things start easing a bit, you're here in the line and you'll get paid.
Yeah.
But if you have the resources, we should pay.
So as an industry body like the CII, FICCI or ASSOCHAM, do they actually collectively sit and say, okay, folks, let's pay the MSMEs their dues?
It's been part of official recommendations from the government and from CII for a long time, very much for a long time.
Okay.
It's something that we just have to do. It's the right way of doing it. There's too much of a short-term outlook, if you ask me, which sort of says that, okay, I can get away without paying because you have a sort of almost a monopoly situation in terms of buying power.
Yeah.
I think that's a short-term outlook.
Yeah. So the other thing, moving a bit away from migrant workers, which is a genuine problem. Let's look at what does with COVID continuing, we're still not seeing flattening of the curve. The numbers probably would increase. We are not sure whether they will go sharply up. We don't know whether when will it withdraw. Given these circumstances, even the cliche new normal, doesn't really make sense. So how do you look at corporate India navigating this new normal?
So, the first thing that, when people say, well, it's now a new normal, it's you're talking in a manner that says what the new normal is.
Yeah.
And at present, as you say, I mean, none of us have any idea which way it's going to actually go.
Yeah.
I think certainly we would all expect it, that at the end of 8 weeks of a very stringent lockdown, we would have seen much more success in the numbers tapering off, flattening the curve, first flattening out, then starting to bend down and then coming down to a very low rate. We've not seen that. We've seen it continue to rise, not exponentially, but it's continuing to rise in a pretty steep straight line. So where does that take us from a health perspective? I don't know, and I don't know if anyone knows. And what does that imply for how we will operate? Well, that maybe we have a better idea of. I mean, I think we're going to have to live with this, we're going to have to live with the virus for the better part of the next year and a half. Certainly until there's a vaccine that's effective enough and that can be administered widely enough, to 1.3 billion people. And if that's the case, how will we live? Probably with these micro-containment areas. And what I would really love to see is some kind of a transparent dashboard that said how things would be managed at the individual city level. And maybe it's possible using, using good science, using, we have good epidemiologists in the country, using a combination of good scientists working together to come up with the right kind of control dashboards that say that look, per community area, per ward, say in a city, if the typical ward has, I don't know, 20,000, 50,000 people living in it, then what infection rate says that you should, if you're below that rate, you should ease up more and let more things happen. And what infection rate says that you need to actually lock down more and restrict more movement and activity. And I think these micro-containment areas is the way to go.
And for the industry, how do you think things are going to change? Like, is it, work from home? Is it going to become more and more prevalent? Office spaces, we ran a story today saying that the office spaces market is going to kind of shrink. People are not looking at office spaces anymore. How do you see that happening?
Well, I think without question. So for example, we were in the month of until I'd say halfway through the month of March, we were in the process of finalizing buying a plot of land in Ahmedabad for our new office because we were all out of space in our Ahmedabad office. And we've now put that off indefinitely because we've said, we were very glad actually that there were delays and we didn't buy the land because we would not then have built anything on it for a while.
Yeah.
So I think we're like us. I think there are many people who would be putting off those kinds of investments and constructions that could be put off, for a period of time. Will habits change so dramatically that, a large chunk of people will work permanently from home? I don't know. I think there's a work, it's working from home is not, there is an efficiency thing, but it's maybe a short run thing, that you work from home 1 day a week, 2 days a week. Yeah, that maybe is an efficiency enhancing thing. You work from home permanently. I don't know. How do you build a company culture that's effective and human and pleasant with people working from home? I have no idea how you go about doing that, and I wouldn't really like to try. I mean, I know how to build a good company culture with everyone together.
Yeah.
How do you do it with people working from home? I don't think you can.
Yeah.
So I'm less of a believer in permanent working from home than all of what we're hearing now. I think as soon as people can, from a health perspective, be back at work in strength, people will be back at work in strength.
Yeah. Naushad, one thing, and then I'll probably throw it open to the audience, to our viewers. This is about companies working, much below their total capacities, under 70%. We have heard of wage cuts across many organizations. We have also heard of, started beginning to hear of layoffs, of people losing jobs. Is it going to be rampant this year?
So
will I be lucky if I just kind of, sail through the year?
So, you shouldn't worry. Whatever was going to hit the media is already hit. I think a lot depends on what the culture and work styles and practices of companies are. Our approach is, at the end, we truly believe that the only differentiator we have is the people we have. It's not technology, it's not the factory, it's not anything. It's just the quality of the people that we have. So we will protect people completely. So, that's the last thing that would get addressed. Only if the survival of the company was under threat do you go there.
Yeah.
Right? But you would go before that to wage cuts, and you would go before that to wage deferments.
Yep.
So, for example, one of the things that we did was we said, look, people have a conveyance allowance, and the conveyance allowance is to cover the cost of coming to work. Now, if you're not coming to work, you don't need to cover that cost.
Yeah.
So the first thing we cut was conveyance allowance.
Yeah.
Then the second thing that we've done now is that for higher levels in the company, we've said a deferment of wages. And when we get our sales above break-even level, then we will pay that amount back.
Yeah.
So there's a percentage of wages above a certain level, which we are deferring. So that's the way in which we've tried to approach it. Now we're in a good position because we came into this on the 1st of April with zero debt. So we're going to use our overdraft facilities and our debt to support our operations in this period of time.
Yeah.
Other companies are not so fortunate to have that cushion. And depending on where they are, they will have to take recourse as they need to. But I hope more and more companies follow the approach of not reducing people. Because I think even, it's much better to reduce wages than to reduce people. And it's much better to defer wages than to reduce them, and so on. Because that's what sustains, that not only sustains the company in an employment, but it's also good for the recovery, because it means you can bounce back so much faster.
Yeah, yeah. Let me just throw it now to our audience. May I request? I already have a list of questions from many people.
I see 83.
Yeah. So may I request Kirit Parekh, to chairman of IRAD, to ask his question?
Hi, Kirit.
Can you hear me, Naushad?
Can hear you just fine.
Yeah. Naushad, what you said, there are a couple of surprises I find. First of all, that you said you are paying your wages to your workers, and still a lot of workers went away. So if if the government had followed your advice and given everyone a loan for paying the workers' wages, would we have avoided this huge outflow of migrants and all the pain and trouble we have imposed on them? Or secondly, I want to know, if suppose in the first week of lockdown, when the rate of infection was very, very low, we should have let the workers go home. That would have really, and we could have tracked them, as you are probably doing that, because everyone is a mobile these days and so on. And we could have really contained the thing in a much nicer way without the pain that we have imposed. We could have even facilitated their going home.
So, Kirit, your question's exactly right. I mean, first of all, if we had kept paying people, could it have avoided the huge thing that we've seen? I think it could have avoided a lot of it. There are migrant workers and migrant workers. There are people who are formally employed employees in various enterprises, and then there are people who are maybe have no labor contracts, or are self-employed, like the person running the tea shop. And we need to address all of those needs. So I think the wage support proposal that we made, if it had happened, it could probably have addressed a very large number of people. How many, I don't know, but it would have been in the many millions of people who would have been supported. I don't see any problem with them actually going home, because if they were not able to work because the production facility was closed, let them go back and be at home for a period of time. That's just fine. That's a good thing. And then when things open up again, we make arrangements for them to come back. So I see no problem with that, as long as the individuals keep getting their wages and they have an assurance they will continue to get their wages. Could we have done this in a much more organized way? Absolutely. I do not understand why lockdowns need to be a surprise. Why can't they be transparent? Why can't there be discussion between different people, different alternatives debated, etc.? And then there's the right alternative that emerges. For example, I do not know why the first lockdown needed to be announced with 4 hours notice. That's what caused a lot of the immediate crisis for many migrant workers. Because there was this sudden mass of people who tried to get on trains and so on to go home. And the next thing that you remember that the Maharashtra went into a lockdown, I think on Sunday. Big crush of people. So then they said, okay, now people are going to spread the infection. So then they stopped the trains. I think we were reacting to these things instead of approaching it in a transparent and planned way. And I think we could have avoided a lot of the problems if we'd done it in a more transparent and planned way. And I don't think these things take genius. I don't think these things are so difficult to figure out. I think they just take a certain amount of logic And if a group of people get together and talk about them, you'll probably be able to figure out what possible outcomes will be, and then actually announce things in a manner which would be much better sequenced. So for example, maybe one could say, hey, listen, we're going to go into a lockdown. We're going to go into this lockdown 1 week from today. And you put on extra trains, etc., so that people can actually go home comfortably in that period of time.
May I request Rajiv Kaul of Nico Engineering, Chairman Nico Engineering? Rajiv?
Can I be heard?
Yeah, of course.
Can hear you fine, Rajiv.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Iyer, and hi, Naushad. It's always good to hear you again. Good learning. Thank you, Naushad. My question, Naushad, is to, in a way, touch on a topic which Mr. Iyer had mentioned in his opening remarks, and you also touched upon the hospitality, tourism, theme park, restaurants, entertainment sector. Now, this is a very large sector. It accounts for about 9 or 9.3% of India's GDP. It employs 42 million people. So a very, very large direct and indirect employment is in this tourism sector in its aggregate, including airlines downwards. Now, so far, nothing has come from the government side to, in a way, give a little surety to the sector and give a surety to jobs for people working in this sector, be it a travel agent, be it a theme park, or be it hotel. And the holding power of many organizations, be they medium, above medium, be they large, be they small, is obviously circumspect. So what would your advice be to people in this industry, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, what would your advice to the government be to ensure that this very large sector, which went into immediate stoppage and which will be opened at the very end of the cycle, and even after it's opened, the COVID scare will remain. So people won't start traveling and run around to movie halls or theme parks or travel to overseas or within India. So what would your sort of view on both these aspects be?
So, Rajiv, to the extent that I can answer that question, I mean, in fact, the recommendation that we'd made from CII to the government was this, what I mentioned to Vaidi, which is this loss pool of where around 20% of all lending could be considered a kind of loss pool that's backstopped by the government, that it would be aimed at the sectors that were particularly affected, that would struggle for many months to see a return of demand, either because it was just not allowed, like a movie hall or a sports facility, or a swimming pool, say a public swimming pool, or it would take a long while to get back, because before people start flying around the country and needing all the planes that we have, or staying in all the hotels that we have. That's what we'd recommended. I hope something will be forthcoming at some point in time, because it is an essential thing to sustain businesses that are good businesses in themselves, that have just been hit by this completely unprecedented situation. In terms of what would I recommend to the companies concerned, I don't know what I can say that's of any value or use. I'm sure the companies concerned are doing everything they possibly can, to reduce costs, to try to diversify as much as they can. I mean, I've seen from hotels, I think hotels are probably going to see a revival sooner than later, because people will start moving, at least in a limited way. And as they move in a limited way, hotels will start coming back to life, at least at a certain level of occupancy, and then they can scale up. And I've seen many letters that have come from different hotel groups, reassuring people. I end up being on most hotel group frequent user programs, and I've got many letters saying this is how we're taking special care in terms of hygiene, in terms of frequency of cleaning, and so on, just as a reassurance that you can go there and stay there safely. So I'm much more comfortable and confident about hotels. I'm a little more concerned about taking a flight, but I think we'll get over that. Europe, flights are back. I mean, they're not back in huge frequency, but they're back. I got an email. I'm also on various airline frequent flyer programs, and I've so far received emails from Lufthansa, Swiss, and Singapore Airlines. So, in terms of how they're handling things, how they're operating with a certain minimum of capacity, how they intend to add more flights in June, etc. So I think some of that will start opening up, but I agree with you that it's going to be a long time before we're back to the kind of levels that we saw last year. I think in India, we have a big advantage in that in all of these areas, there's a huge amount of pent-up demand. There's this huge quantum of underlying demand, and I think it would be nice to see that some of that come back, maybe in an organized way. For example, all the flights to bring people back from various parts of the world have been operated by Air India. Very glad Air India is doing the flights. Some of the private airlines should have been also included in that same program so that they could operate and use their planes and so on. I'm told Air India has handled the entire operation. I have two friends who've taken these flights, a couple of these flights, one from Singapore, one from the US. And they said it was handled really smoothly, really efficiently done, very nicely handled, very safe, etc. So I think, encouraging more participation in things like that would be a good thing to do. And I think we'll see some of this come back fairly quickly, actually.
Can I request Nitin Mehta, who's Vice President with Accenture? Nitin?
Hi.
Yeah.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, Nitin.
Yeah, sure, Nitin.
Hi. Hi, Naushad. First of all, a comment on your views on work from home. It completely resonates with what we are thinking as well. I work for Accenture. It's a fairly large portfolio from a real estate perspective. And we are struggling. And my question is related to work from home. On one side, obviously we've had TCS coming up with a public statement saying 75% of their 5 lakh strong workforce is going to start working from home. While, dare I say, it's probably posturing for clients to some extent, but at least that's what they've come out officially. On the other hand, you have social distancing norms kicking in where almost, out of, let's say, 100 seats, we are able to utilize just 32 seats, at least for the short term, right? Because until we have a vaccine in place, these social distancing norms will sort of be there. So I just wanted your views on how do you think corporate real estate in this country will pan out? And this is important because it has a lot of other sort of directly and indirectly related labor also involved in this. So just your views on that aspect.
So I think for corporate real estate, in terms of sort of demand, that for space that people in the short run, I can only say for us, I can certainly say for ourselves as a company, the last thing we will look at investing in this year is more office space. I just don't see us doing that, even in the places where we're clear we need a new office, right? Now, there may be an exception there. If we get an incredibly good deal, sort of 3 months out, 6 months out, maybe we would in one place or something. But otherwise, I just don't see us investing in office space this year. I think we would invest in, most CapEx would be put on hold. The first CapEx that we would go for would be anything that adds to direct output and productivity, and offices would come really last. Now, does that mean that that's the way to be forever? No, I don't think so. So I think come next year, I think one can look at a revival, probably in the commercial market. What I think one might see, though, is I think one might see people wanting to repurpose existing offices. For example, in all our sales offices, we're just starting an exercise to do some brainstorming around what's the future of one of our sales offices. Do we need desks for everyone, or do we instead need places where people can come and meet and collaborate and actually get to know each other well? So maybe instead of filling the office with desks, we need to fill the office with coffee machines and tables to sit and chat. So, it's so I think, there may be some repurposing around offices that happens going forward. But I think we'll get back to some extent to office space demand, but next year. I don't see it happening this year. But this is completely out of my area of comfort.
May I request Ajit Mishra, Director of the Institute of Economic Growth?
Hi, Naushad. This may not be a very fair question, but from your answer to Kirit's question and other observations, it's very clear that lack of forward planning has contributed a lot to this crisis, at least in the Indian case. Yes, future is uncertain, but it's no good saying that we don't know anything about the future. Of course, we can do various scenarios planning. So in that context, my question is here. Right now, I know you are busy, trying to see or trying to plan how to get your other 300 back into the office, okay, the plant. Is the corporate, or are you people also thinking, what happens if 3 months down the line we have a huge spike, a second wave, and again there is another closure?
So, I think the important thing for us, I think the important thing for us looking forward is that if there is another such closure, we should be better prepared. So what does better prepared mean? One of the things that we've been, as I think it's probably true of everyone, that we've struggled with in the first days was broadband connectivity. So ensuring that, everyone has good broadband connectivity at home is something that we would be ensuring over these next couple of months. There's a lot of progress that's already happened in these last 2 months. It needs to extend across large parts of the organization. The second thing that we should be doing, which we need to really initiate, is how do we break up production so that it's less interdependent. Ever since, as you would know better than anyone else, Ajit, ever since Adam Smith, the extent of specialization is limited by the extent of the market. You get efficiency by planning for a larger volume of output. You get greater specialization. Greater specialization means that you have a more interdependent process, and where one disruption of a piece in that process can disrupt the entire process. So how do you build a more robust process where you gain the efficiency of specialization for most of the time, but when you need to, you can rejig your manufacturing process such that it becomes more robustly more robust in itself and less dependent on every piece being there. So if you have 20 people out of 60 available, can you ensure you get 1/3 of your output instead of, or as close to that as possible, instead of 5% of our output? Yeah. So I think those are the two things that we would really try and do. And then there's one more thing that I'll say. One of the things that we found really powerful is we do a daily connect call at 9 in the morning with our leadership team, and the team has grown over these weeks. And we find that a really nice platform that brings everyone together and aligns everyone. And I think our thoughts are that we'll continue it. We'll continue it even when we're all back at work, because it's a really nice way of bringing everyone together, and whether they join remotely or whether they join physically in a room doesn't matter.
May I request Amik Azmin, Financial Times, the South Asia Bureau Chief, to ask a question?
Hi, Naushad. Hope you're well. It's been really interesting to listen to you. I just wanted to come back to this issue of labor. I was interested to hear you say that. Oh, hello?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine.
Okay. I was interested to hear you say that you were able to pay your workers, and many of them were able to leave and go back to their villages before the lockdown, which raises the question of, did you have advance notice that allowed you to get your workers, back home? Because it seems like those workers who were able to go home and reach home may be more than happy to come back, whereas those who have gone through, very difficult ordeals over the last 2 months, in big cities, those are the ones who are kind of like, just get me back home at all costs. And I also wanted to ask you a question about something in the business culture in India that, you kind of compared yourself to the small guy tea shop, who isn't even able to sell a single cup of tea. And obviously he must have very little carrying capacity to care for his workers. But there's also a huge, sector, in between of kind of formal sector companies that have hundreds of workers that aren't just roadside tea stall stands, and that did apparently essentially let their workers just go, or left them really completely in the lurch. And that seems that was widespread in the construction industry and other sectors where people were just, maybe they got their March wages and otherwise they were just left to their own devices. And I wanted to ask, what you think that says about kind of the attitude towards labor by businesses in India. And lastly, I know a lot of businesses have challenged the Minister of Home Affairs order that you must pay your workers and you can't lay anybody off. Do you think that was an appropriate order for the government to give, in the absence of also offering any help to companies to help them carry the burden of paying their workers? Thank you.
So Vaidi, if I forget one of the questions, you'll have to remind me what it is, right? So the first question on how did people get back? No, we certainly didn't have advance warning. We had the same 4 hours, but we had one additional advantage. Being in Maharashtra, the lockdown started in Maharashtra actually earlier. First in the PCMC area, where we got a call from the municipal commissioner asking if we would participate in a voluntary lockdown. This was on the Friday before the Wednesday that the official country lockdown came in. And we said, yes, if everyone was going to participate in it, or broadly most people are going to participate, we would too. And so we had that sort of advanced few days. And most of the people that left from the plant and went back home to their villages only needed to travel by road in Maharashtra. So it was much simpler for them to actually go. The few who left state and went further away, after the Maharashtra lockdown, they took flights. Home. It helped also that there were a couple of holidays coming up that week between two holidays in Maharashtra, Gudi Padwa and Maharashtra Day. So there were some holidays coming up. So people said, well, if there's these lockdowns, etc., let's go home. So they were able to get back. In terms of the what does this say about the wider culture? Then I don't remember the third question, Vaidi, so you'll have to remind me of that. But
the third question was about the government's instruction to employers. You must pay your workers.
Sure.
Got it. All of that.
So in terms of the first on the business culture point, my understanding of talking to many friends is that they did support people not only through March, everyone did March, but people also did April, and even construction firms did April. But when there seemed to be no end in sight, then I think companies, especially some of the companies that were employing people on a mass scale, then started saying that, look, we're not going to be able to go any further. And they started then not paying people who weren't working either, but not paying people and not supporting them. Could they have done better? I don't know. I think it depends on each individual company and what their particular situation was. And I would guess that some of them probably had the resources and could do better, and some of them didn't have a choice and couldn't. I think the thing that we need to address in many ways is actually our labor contracts in the country. We have this situation today where if you're formally employed, you have complete protection and almost no flexibility. And that covers maybe, 10-15% of the total workforce. And then if you're in the 85% that's informally employed, you have almost complete flexibility and pretty well no protection. So you have this very differentiated labor force depending on whether you're informally employed or formally employed. And what's right is something in the middle. What's right is where you have some flexibility, but you also have some protection as an individual employee, and you have something to fall back on. And it should be possible to put something like that together. And I hope that what we've seen on our TV screens in this last 8 weeks of the migrant labor crisis will be a spur for us collectively between industry and the government and labor and unions to put something together that would be humane and that would address these needs for flexibility and protection across the labor force, as opposed to just for a small minority of it. On the question on the government's ruling, well, as you know, it was challenged, and the interim judgment from the Supreme Court was in favor of the companies that file the litigation. And it was then going to come up for, I think, another hearing later this week. And in the course of that, I think the government has actually withdrawn the notification. Yeah, I think do I think as a company that we were responsible to pay people? 100%, because it's the right thing to do. Do I think that the government has any business actually saying that companies must pay people by law even if they're not working? No, I don't think they have that right.
It was really interesting hearing what you did at your end. And it would be fair to say that you are probably in not the top quartile, but within the top quartile in the top quartile. My question is on a larger front, that migrant labor from various sectors, whether organized, formal, informal, etc., who have struggled and managed to get home. Do you think they will come back? And if they will come back, what will attract them to come back to the place of work, or at least to the area where they were working, if not in the same company, if not that same contractor, if not that similar kind of activity?
So, Arun, I think, I don't think we're in the top quartile of the top quartile, by the way. I think it's reasonably true of quite a large number of at least formal sector employers. We're not alone. But in terms of what will attract migrant labor to come back, easy exit and easy entry go together. And I think when we started hearing, in some states, Karnataka, for example, canceling trains, or initially not even providing transport for people to go back until there was a real uproar, and then providing them as a kind of reaction. When we make it so difficult for people to exit, we also simultaneously make it difficult for people to enter. So I think we have to recognize that. And I think whatever attracted people to come and work in the cities in the first place, we're going to need to do more for them to come back. And what is that more? I think two things. One is there should be some degree of security. Meaning if people are coming back, I think they should come back with a clear understanding of how they will be looked after in the longer run. Addressing Amy's question on business culture, maybe not being able to get people back, except under certain specific contracts, is the best way of driving that change in business culture. This is an opportunity to make a step change in how we organize this otherwise very informal employment. And the second thing that I would love to see, but that's a medium term at least fix, is where will they live? I think for too long we've been in the position of living in our cities and closing our eyes to slums that we drive past. Those slums are geographically nearby. That's what makes them so attractive for people to live there. But they're obviously terrible places to live. I mean, we've always known this. This is not news. But the current health crisis has brought home how it's a terribly unhealthy place for people to live who live there, but for everyone around them as well. So how do we address this going forward? There are various schemes that have been talked about in the past for slum rehabilitation. Can we actually provide decent housing a little bit away, maybe from the downtown areas that you have slums today, to redevelop those areas which are prime real estate, and use that redevelopment to fund setting up this housing elsewhere, and then provide good, efficient public transport for people to come in. It's a medium to long-term project. City by city, it's something that we have to do. But it sounds to me like the kind of grand public works project that could create mass employment for people and could transform our cities into a much healthier, humane place to be.
Gaurang Sharma to ask his question. Gaurang. Is Gaurang?
Hello.
Yep.
Hi, Gaurang.
So my question is, amnesties times, the industry is essentially very stressed. Both employers and employees are stressed. So how will the scope of industrial psychology vary in the upcoming times? And second, the finance industry.
Thank you, Gaurang.
Okay. What about the finance industry? Sorry. You mean industrial psychology? I'll try and answer the question. But
if we can limit it to industrial psychology, because
sure.
I can take one more
okay.
then. Yeah,
sure. So one of the things that we've found is that if you just connect with people, one of the things that we tried to do very early on is that we did a series of town halls that connected with everyone across the company, and just gave people an opportunity to ask questions. And people, the first week of questions were all around what's happening with the virus. Yeah, because everyone was afraid. You have this thing that apparently comes from, comes from nowhere, comes from Wuhan, and hits the world and transforms lives in an incredibly short period of time. You have this potentially life-threatening thing. So there's a lot of fear, and you need to deal with that fear. How do you deal with the fear? You deal with the fear by talking, and looking at data and sharing data and sharing views and sharing the percentage of all cases that are asymptomatic, and then saying, and of the percentage that are symptomatic, the percentage that are serious are a very small percentage, and the percentage of the ones that are serious only a very small percentage of that actually end up being really life-threatening. So, you can provide a certain degree of reassurance just by talking with people and sharing what's going on. And then the next phase was that people started saying, okay, so what happens to us? How's the company doing? Will the company survive? Will the companies, and if it survives, will it support all of us? And will all of us be in it? And so you provide that reassurance too. And you do it by, I think you do it by being honest more than anything else, which includes, saying, well, if you don't know how things are going to go because you don't know how the illness is going to go, you say, I don't know how it's actually going to turn out, but this is where we are. We have no debt, so we're quite secure, etc., etc. But that means that we can sustain for maybe 4 months, 5 months. But if it's 4 years, no, we can't sustain, right? So, but so you share information in as honest a way as you can, and I think people respect that. And I think it conveys to people that actually they're not alone. They're everyone around them is as scared, but you're in it in a sense altogether. And I think the response that we've seen in the company has been absolutely fabulous. I mean, it's just fabulous. The commitment. All companies suffer from some issues, in terms of, say, functional silos and so on. They've all gone. They've gone. There are none. People are completely collaborative. There are no egos at play. It's wonderful. It's great to see. And I think this whole crisis has really brought out the best in people, and I think that's part of the same psychology issue.
May I request Nehal Rao Kadam? She has a very interesting question. Is Nehal Rao Kadam around?
Hello?
Yeah.
Naushad, sir, it's very interesting to listen from you. A lot of aspects of the lockdown and how we will go out. My basic question is, the migrant issue. Maharashtra as a government is what challenge they have is the migrants. They are more energy investing in going into the handling the situation of migrants. So can any industry, Inc. or government is looking forward for balanced, industrial growth across the country?
So, if you look at what UP and MP have done, that's their objective. They've gone about it in a very strange way. UP has sort of basically said, so they said we're suspending all our labor laws for 3 years. And MP has talked about a certain list of labor laws that they're suspending with the intention of actually attracting investment and creating employment at home so that people then don't need to migrate out of the country. Now, is it a good idea to create labor-intensive employment where labor is? 100%. Makes total sense, right? Why should Indian companies want to go to Bangladesh to set up labor-intensive factories, say in the garment industry, instead of going to Orissa or Jharkhand and setting up factories there? And we should be able to make it as attractive for them to go to Orissa or Jharkhand. So I sympathize with that as an approach. The way they went about it, I think, again, is too much of a knee-jerk reaction. It's, we need to get rid of our labor laws. You just suspend them all. Surely that's not right. I mean, surely we need something that addresses this question of flexibility and how we provide flexibility, but with some protection for labor as well. So I think if we do that, we can create opportunities that are labor-intensive in places where you have labor. Having said that, we should remember that we're one country. And if we're one country, migrancy is wonderful. It's a sign of strength. It's a sign of being one country. We should welcome people moving around the country and mixing up all of our states with people from all states and all communities, because that's what it says to be one country. So I think we should make it attractive for people to stay home and have jobs and opportunities there. And we should make it attractive for people to move in good conditions of health and to be welcome wherever they move and wherever they choose to move. I don't believe that any state is for its own residents alone. I think every state should be open and keen to attract the best from every other state, because that's how we can create opportunities that are attractive and have one state compete with the other to create those opportunities. But let's start addressing the conditions under which migrants come and live when they do come and live in our states.
Is there any possibility that suspension of labor laws in many states can force workers to leave the state and work somewhere else? This is very similar. Yeah,
it's the other side of the same coin.
Yeah,
you know, so it might do that, which would be the exact opposite of what it's intended to do. I mean, you know, you might create attractive conditions for bad jobs.
Yeah,
which is obviously not the intention. That's not what any state wants to do. So I think, you know, can states find a balance? I'm sure they can, right? And I think it's a good thing to have state initiatives, because this is an area where I've given up expecting the central government to actually do the right things for labor reform. You know, this government came into power in 2014 and put labor reform on the agenda for the first time since 1991. You know, it had a couple of setbacks and then it backed off and hasn't spoken about it since. And then it said, we leave it to the states. So let's work with the states and get the right labor regulations that provide this balance of flexibility and protection. And we won't get it right at first shot, but let's keep tweaking it until we do get it right. And let different states try different options and see which ones win out by one state competing with the other in terms of having the right rules in place. But when you compete, you don't want to compete in a race to the bottom. You don't want to compete in a race to no laws. Yeah. Let's get that balance. Let states compete on tweaking the balance of protection and flexibility. I think we can. I don't think it's so difficult to do.
Thank you so much, Naushad, for joining us. It has been a wonderful session with so many participants. I really appreciate you taking time out for this. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you. And thanks to everyone for all the great questions.
Thanks to everybody. Yeah. Thanks to everybody who joined us. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thanks, Vaidi.
Thank you.